that I really need to deserve this award. So the last 2 days I was in New Orleans working with police, trying to promote active bystandership by police so that they stop their fellow officers from doing unnecessary harm. You will hear more about this as I go on. I have done work in a whole variety of areas. I studied what leads people to help others, be active bystanders, and what stops them from helping others. What is the roots of violence by groups against other groups, such as genocide, mass killing, and terrorism, and how we might be able to prevent these things. I and my associates have worked on reconciliation in a number of different places, and I will talk about some of these things. I will skip along my slides because this is a 2.5-hour talk, and I know that you don't want to miss the reception afterwards. So I'm going to move along as I need to. All along, in all this work, a core theme for me has been the role of the bystander, because it's the passivity of the bystander, the witness who doesn't take action, that allows the evolution and unfolding of very harmful behavior. And it is the activity of bystanders, people who try to address and prevent problematic events and actions that can prevent these things. So who's a bystander? A bystander is a witness who is in a position to know what's happening, and it's a position to take action. Why do I say a position to know? The reason I say that is because witnesses often close their eyes and try to avoid knowing, even though they have the information in front of them. So for example, many years ago, when I was teaching at Harvard, I had students collapse on a quiet street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when somebody was coming towards them from about 50 yards away on the other side of the street. Some people seeing that immediately rushed over to that person. Other people hesitated, waited, and sometimes somebody else came by and approached that person, but there were a small portion, but significant portion of proportion of individuals who, after a single look, looked away, never looked back, and many of them turned away, turned off the street at the next corner. Some people try to avoid taking in information, I assume, in order to avoid feeling responsible, not wanting to take action. This is true not only of these people on the street in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but of people under many circumstances. In 1987, I was giving a talk at the University of Trier in Germany. People knew me at that time about my research on helping behavior and altruism, but I asked, could I instead talk about the roots of genocide? I just started to seriously study these things. And they said, sure. So I talked about the roots of genocide, but also asked if they could arrange for me to interview people who were young Germans at the time during the 1930s, when Hitler came to power, and there was this increasingly harmful behavior towards many people, including Jews in Germany. So they gathered about 25 older Germans, and we were scheduled to speak for 2 hours. It ended up a 4-hour conversation, and at the end, I was the one who had to leave. It was amazing how much these people focused on their positive experiences during that time. They were sitting around campfires, they were singing songs, they had a feeling of community, and it was very slow that some of them began to say, oh yes, I noticed something about the persecution of Jews. Now one of them said at some point, oh yeah, my father was renting rooms to people, and at some point the Gestapo came and told him not to rent rooms to Jews. So it's not that they were denying anything. I'm quite certain of that. It is that they weren't paying attention, and it was difficult for them to recover anything that was going on around them. It happens in all kinds of situations. At the time of the genocide in Rwanda, bodies were floating down rivers. People were talking about genocide, but the United States government wasn't. There is a famous interview or a famous event with the Speaker of the State Department talking to members of the media. And somebody, we were saying there was no genocide in Rwanda. And when people were pushing this person speaking for the government and were saying, well, what about all these things that were happening? This person said, well, there were some genocidal events. And when she was asked how many genocidal events makes up a genocide, she really had no response to that. So what I'm saying is people try to avoid, deny, and do all kinds of things often to evade responsibility. So I never talked about this particular thing in a lecture, but I will briefly say a few things about what are the influences that led me to do this work, because all of these influences involve bystanders. The first one was when I was a graduate student at Stanford. During my second year, Perry London, who was a pretty well-known clinical psychologist at the time, came as a visiting professor for a year, and we became friends. And Perry started to tell me about this research that they were doing. They were the first to begin to study rescuers. The term rescuers refers to people in Nazi Europe. At that time, it referred to people in Nazi Europe who endangered themselves in order to save lives after the genocide began. You will see as I talk about these things that in the run-up to genocide, in just about every society, people remain passive. There are perpetrators, there are victims, and there are all the other people in the society who are witnesses, bystanders, and these witnesses, bystanders remain universally just about passive all along. But once a genocide actually begins, and people see that some people are being taken away to be killed, that a very small number of people, a very small percentage of people begin to take action. And Perry began to study this with a couple of other people. They were the first people to do this work. What's interesting about it is they couldn't continue because they couldn't get any funding. People were saying to them, this is too long after these events have taken place for you to be able to meaningfully study this. They were being told this 1960, 61. Why was this? Because in the 1980s, a whole host of studies of rescuers began to appear. So obviously, in the 1980s, it was not too late, but in 1970, it was. And I think the reason it is because people take time to somehow make peace with the idea of such horrors and begin to engage with it. Anyway, one of the interesting contributions of Perry and his two colleagues was the idea of marginality of rescuers. Now, some other people questioned this because I think they misinterpreted the meaning of marginality. It didn't mean that these people were disconnected from other human beings. What it meant was that they had certain characteristics that made them less embedded in the group. So, Oscar Schindler, a very famous rescuer that probably many of you heard about and maybe saw the movie Schindler's List, he was a Protestant. He married a Catholic woman from another village. He moved away from his village. So in a variety of ways, he was marginal. He was less embedded in his group. You know, there were other people who were marginal because they had unusual characteristics or because one of their parents was from another country. He suggested a couple other things, but I will talk about rescuers later again, so I will just talk about that later. I was influenced also by the work of Darlene Gladner. Probably all of you know about that work. After the Katya Genovese murder, they studied bystanders and they came up with the famous bystander effect, which means that the larger the number of people who are present, the less likely that any one person takes action. And there is a lot of truth to it, but it's not universal. For example, I don't think it's genetic. I did a study with kindergartners, first graders, second graders, fourth graders, and sixth graders, who either alone or in pairs heard a crash and sounds of distress from an adjoining room. And kindergartners and first graders were more likely to have when they were together with another child. Why? Well, one of the proposals of Dr. Lutney was pluralistic ignorance. We put them a poker face in front of others, in public. We don't show any reaction. And everybody looks around and sees that other people do not react. So they come to interpret the situation as one in which no action is necessary. Well, these kids reacted in a different way. They immediately started to talk to each other and trying to figure out what was happening, and then they joined together to take action. This increased likelihood of help when there was another child also present, diminished by second grade, disappeared by second grade, which to me says something about either socialization or a combination of maturation and socialization. Another influence on my work was my own life experience, again involving active bystandership. When I was a 6-year-old child in Hungary, a 6-year-old Jewish child, we were designated to be killed. In Hungary, out of 650,000 Jews approximately 500,000 were killed, most of them taken to Auschwitz. And there were two really important bystanders in my life. One of them was Raoul Wallenberg, who we all know who Raoul Wallenberg was. He was a Swede who, for various reasons, came to Hungary. He was asked to go to Hungary and try to save life. And he was a heroic rescuer or helper who saved a lot of lives. But the more important influence on me was a Christian woman who was working for my family. And she took me and my little sister into hiding at some point with another Christian family. And then when my family got these so-called letters of protection from Wallenberg, and we moved into one of these houses that he set up, a house that was constantly raided. It was not that protected, but it was. Both yes and not completely. She came with us rather than abandoning us. And while we were there, she was doing wonderful things for us, endangering her own life. And once, actually, she was almost killed. And she was a continuous influence in my life. And then the other thing is evolution. As you will see, I believe that a crucial aspect of our lives, especially in relation to people helping others or harming others, is how we change as a result of our actions. And so once you get involved, once I got involved in doing this kind of work, I changed as a result of that involvement. So mass violence does not suddenly emerge. It's not like people love each other and get along beautifully and cooperate wonderfully, and then they suddenly begin to kill each other. It evolves as people begin to harm the other, begin to devalue the other more than they have done before, begin to scapegoat them for life problems, identify them as a threat to themselves, begin to take limited action against them. And each time when somebody, a person, a group, a society takes action to harm some other people, they have to justify it. Now, occasionally, very rarely, individuals look at what they have done and they have values that say to them, this was wrong, I'm not going to do this again. I had a student who wrote a paper once about this, saying a friend of his stole something from him and he got very upset, and he invited this person over and he beat this person up, and he was so upset afterwards that he decided never to harm anybody again. That's not what normally happens. Unless there are constraints on an individual or group that harms another, they justify their actions. How do they justify it? By identifying the reasons that they have done it because of the other person's or other group's actions, or because of the very nature of these other people. And when you do that, then it becomes easier to do harm again. And then everything can change. The standards of conduct that become acceptable in relation to that group can change. Institutions are created to do harm, and there is this progression and evolution. Now, as I said, witnesses usually, bystanders usually remain passive. And this is what I was just talking about. What are these actions? Both internal bystanders and all external bystanders remain passive, and that's often complicity. For example, when the genocide in Rwanda began, many countries sent in military missions to do what? Not to try to stop the genocide, but to take out their own nationals, removing them from danger. Now, what does that say to perpetrators? If other countries remove these people and then leave, it basically says, you can do whatever you want. We are not going to intervene. We are not going to engage. There were all kinds of actions in Germany, in relation to Germany also, like that. Now, why are bystanders passive? I mentioned pluralistic ignorance, that sometimes people show a poker face, and everybody looks around and says, oh, there is no reason. Darwin let me also propose a diffusion of responsibility. When other people are around, responsibility is diffused. But there are also other significant reasons. Mass violence, especially, takes place under very difficult conditions of life, or a response to difficult conditions of life. There is economic decline, there is political chaos, there are significant social changes, and people are deeply impacted. Their basic human universal needs are frustrated. What do I mean by basic human universal needs? Well, anybody here in this room who doesn't have a need to feel secure, please raise your hand. Anybody in this room who doesn't have a need to be able to control or influence important events in your lives. Anybody in this room who doesn't have a need to feel significant connection to some important people in your lives or some important groups? Anybody in this room who doesn't have a need to understand the world that you live in and your own place in that world? All of these needs, which are profound needs, they cannot be ignored. They some way or another need to be fulfilled. They all get frustrated when life conditions are very difficult and when there is deep, significant conflict between one's own group and another group. All these create chaos and disorganization and frustrate these needs. So, what happens? Being part of a group and feeling connected to a group and getting the vision that the group provides for you about how you may live life and what can be significant in the world for you become especially important. So separating yourself from the group and going against where the group is going becomes especially difficult, because the result may be rejection, being sort of thrown out of the group when you need the group so deeply. So these are very beyond pluralistic ignorance, beyond diffusion of responsibility. This need for the group and for the group to satisfy the basic needs that you have to some degree are crucial. Now, in addition to that, there is a history. You know what? I'm just going to skip this one. So when bystanders are passive, when things are happening, harmful actions are taking place, and bystanders are passive, what is the effect on these perpetrators? You know, let's say that, forgive me, but let's say that I hit her, and nobody does anything in this room. And maybe some people smile or laugh, maybe embarrassed laughter, but smile or laugh. What does that say to me? It says to me that you think that what I did is okay. It's not a problem. And then I haven't done that, and I may come over to you and do the same thing to you, and maybe a little more forcefully. And again, if everybody is passive, I think this is okay. And that's what happens in the course of the evolution of violence. That is a consequence of passivity. But it's not only perpetrators who are affected. You know, if you are a bystander and you see this happening and you don't do anything, and especially if I continue to harm them or to go on and harm other people, and you are watching this, originally you may feel empathy and care. But that gives you distress. It makes you feel uncomfortable. Continuously feel empathy and caring. So after a while, I think you begin to distance yourself. You begin to perhaps also devalue these people. You begin to think that there must be something wrong with them, that I'm doing this to them. You know, in the famous obedience experiments of Stanley Milgram, some of the people who continued to administer shocks started to say, why is this person so stupid? Why does this person make all these mistakes? So perpetrators, but also bystanders, can come to a position when they allow this unfolding and increasing harmful behavior towards members of subgroups. Now, this passivity was quite general, for example, in Germany. It was quite general in other countries. You know, I have sanctioned in Germany, in Turkey against the Armenians, in Cambodia against Cambodians, calling it an auto-genocide. In Rwanda, where we worked for a long time, and some other places. And so this is quite common. But in Germany, the Germans started the euthanasia program. What was the euthanasia program? It was killing mentally handicapped, physically handicapped Germans, and Germans with some other characteristics. And this went on sort of quietly for a while. But people came to realize that their relatives were disappearing. And they began to protest. Family members began to protest, lawyers groups began to protest. A famous Catholic bishop spoke out very strongly against it. And officially, the program was terminated. No, there were some small remnants that continued, but in essence, the program was terminated. Why was this happening? It was happening because these people who were killed were seen as us, part of us. They were Germans like us. They were members of families, people we cared and loved, and so the program was terminated. There was only one single action in relation to Jews, and that is sometime fairly late in the war, German women gathered in front of government buildings and protested that their husbands were being taken away, taken to Auschwitz and other camps. And it was stopped. They stopped taking the husbands away, and some of those who were already taken away were brought back from Auschwitz. Now, everybody believed that the Germans hated Jews so much that there can be no effective action taken in their behalf. But here was a case, an action was taken, and we don't know what would have happened if other significant action by German people would have been taken. But as I said, this is not unique to Germany, the passivity along the way as genocide is perpetrated. Forgive me, but I have no idea what's happening. It's not pretty in terms of how much time I have left. So, bystanders have very significant potential to influence events. They have power. Even single individuals can make huge difference in a variety of ways. So I'm going to mention two people. One of them is up there in relation to Milan. One of them is Ron Ridenour. Ron Ridenour was a soldier in Vietnam. He was not at Milan. You know what happened at Milan? American troops went into the village or villages of Milan thinking that they are going to find Viet Cong opposition and they will have to fight very hard. And it turned out that there was no opposition there, there was no Viet Cong there. And they started to kill women, children, and a few old men who were around. And they killed about 350 people. And Ron, who was not there, but who trained with some of the people who were there, heard about this from his colleagues. And he couldn't rest. He felt that he had to do something about this. He went home and talked to members of his family, and they told him, forget about this. This is not your business. He actually did some investigation. There was one person he was told about who did not do shooting. And he tried to find this person, and he finally did after quite a bit of effort, because apparently the army tried to hide him. They sent him to the front line in the hope that he would be killed. He got sick, he had rods in his feet, but they didn't allow him to leave. And finally, not asking for permission, he jumped on a helicopter and went to a hospital, and he found him at the hospital, again to get another witness. Then he started to write letters to members of Congress. And finally, one member of Congress, Congressman Udall, started to have hearings on this, And then a New York Times reporter learned about this and started to write articles about this, and the United States found out about it. Now, why is this important? Because by making this public and having all of us know about it, it became less likely that there will be more Milanis. So I want to mention, this was a kind of indirect action. He didn't start onto it, but there was a helicopter pilot who flew over the hill and saw what was happening. And he landed his helicopter, he got out, and he told, or I'm not sure whether he landed it or whether he used a loudspeaker to tell the American soldiers that if you don't start shooting the Vietnamese, I am going to shoot you from my helicopter. And that made a significant difference. So there are people who can do amazing things, single individuals. And just the power of bystanders. I did a study where there were two people in the room. One was an actual participant in the study, and the other one was a Confederate. And both of them were working separately on the same thing. They were reading some material, and they were supposed to judge personalities on the basis of the characters in the material. And then there is a crash and sounds of distress from another room. So my Confederate says one of several things. Some of the time, the Confederate says, that sounds bad, maybe we should do something, but remain seated. Some of the time, the Confederate says, I don't know what that is. It's probably another experiment. I don't think it has anything to do with us. And some of the time, the Confederate says, that sounds bad, maybe we should do something. You go into the other room and see what's happening, and I'm going to go and find the person in charge. Well, what do you think happens? When the Confederate says, that's probably another experiment, doesn't have to do with us, approximately 25% of the people go into the other room. When the Confederate says, that sounds bad, maybe we should do something, but remain seated, a little over 50% go into the other room. But the Confederate says, that sounds bad, you go into the other room, I find the person in charge. Every single person goes into the other room. Now, what's the point? Often, people hesitate. They don't know what's going on for sure. They look around. There's tourist ignorance. There's a diffusion of responsibility. If somebody says anything that promotes taking action, that changes the situation, and if a person does these three things, indicates that there is a problem, says something about the nature of the problem and the appropriate action, it can make a powerful difference. That doesn't mean that this is going to work all the time, but I think it can make a huge difference many times. How many of you know about our work in Rwanda? Well, it's not overwhelming. I'm not going to talk about it, about it. And of course, I don't have that much time. But anyway, you know, Lori Perlman, my wife, who is a clinical psychologist who specializes in trauma, and I went to Rwanda through a series of events. And we worked there for about 15 years altogether. The first 8-9 years, we went about 3 times a year for 3 weeks each time to do workshops and trainings for people, promoting healing and reconciliation. And we did 2 things primarily. One of them is talking about the origins of genocide in Rwanda. No, not in Rwanda. In fact, specifically not in Rwanda. Origins of genocide in general this was, as things I have done in other situations also, to tell people how things happen and then ask them, how is this relevant to you? Is this what happened here? Or what happened here? Tell us how this is relevant to you. And the reason why this is important, I think, is that when people apply information to their own experience, what can come out of that is what I call experiential understanding. Not something only in your head, but something that connects information with your experience and your feelings also, your emotions. So I think that it can be kind of transformative to do it that way. And so in addition to that, we also talked about the impact on people of this horrible violence, how traumatized people get and what happens to them. One of the reasons that I thought it was important to talk about the origin search, and there were two reasons. One of them was that people there were desperate to hear about it. They chose that we talk about those two particular topics, about a number of different topics that we proposed we could talk about. And the other one was that I want people to understand that these small early steps are not the end, that usually they lead to other and greater steps. Because it's possible to say, when you look at people talking more negatively about another group, well, it's just one little thing. When they begin to kick them out of certain jobs, well, it's just another small thing. But if you understand that one of these things leads to another one, and another one, and another one, that increases the likelihood that people might take some action. And that was, for me, a very important reason to talk about this. So, we did evaluations. We did these workshops with many different groups, with people in the community, with community leaders, with national leaders like government ministers and advisors to the president and so on. And the first time we did this, we did the workshops with people who work with groups in the community. And we did a couple of different ways of studying this. One of them is just talking to them and asking them what was their experience. And they said things like, oh, so this wasn't God's punishment. If you understand the rules, we can act to prevent it. But then we did a formal, very elaborate study. We lost a lot of blood in the process. It's not easy to do pretty formal and serious research in a foreign country where people don't have experience with that kind of research. But I think we did it pretty successfully. It was published in 2005. And we found that having gone through, by the way, we did another thing. We did not want to study the people who were in our training. We wanted to know whether this can spread. So what we studied was groups of people who were trained by people we trained. Once we moved, can this spread? Can this go beyond the people that, the limited number of people that we worked with? So we found was that the people who were trained, it increased their willingness to work with people in the other group. They would say things like, oh, I will work with members of the other group for the sake of the children. It reduced their trauma symptoms. And conditional forgiveness is a little bit complicated, and I don't want to take the time to talk about it. But it had a significant impact for people to participate in this. It's also interesting that these effects didn't show up immediately after the training. Why not? I think when people talk about these things, they can get emotionally aroused. They are impacted. Once that emotional arousal, the immediate effect diminishes, then the effect showed up. When we tested them 2 months later, we found significant differences between the people who had this experience, between two comparison groups. One who received a different kind of training and one who didn't receive any kind of training. Then, these are just pictures of the kind of people that the people we first worked with. As Lori told me, a lot of the work was in small groups. Sometimes we had very nice conditions, and we liked, people when we were working with them, they were ready to sing. Wait a second, what happened to my other picture?
Just go forward. Go forward one more.
I have this beautiful picture hanging out with a group of guys,
One more forward.
Oh, one more forward.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Aren't we all handsome? That is Ophelie, the daughter of one of our research assistants. And her mother described how neighbors came into the house during the genocide and killed the man. And then other neighbors came into the house and wanted to kill the women. And the neighbors who killed the man persuaded the other neighbors not to kill the women. The genocide in Rwanda, as all genocide, was both horrendous and insane in a number of different ways. Let me see what was happening in that other slide. Oh, this is from way later on. That's okay. Then after we did these workshops, people wanted us to extend the reach of it. And we created educational radio programs. Radio, because television was very rare in that country. Few people had television. And so everybody was listening to the radio, over 90% of the population. And educational radio programs, a conflict between two villages, hostility, negativity, over a period of time, reconciliation, and then we did actually an evaluation study, let's see, it was Hallock, and also described in some of the other publications. And listening to the radio program increased empathy with survivors, bystanders, perpetrators. It increased the willingness to say what one believes. And it's not just that people said that we are more willing to say what they believe. It also was the case that we were able to study this and establish that they actually did say more what they believe. Now that's very important because that means they are more likely to be active bystanders. They say what they believe. That's a form of active bystandership. Very important. It increased actual reconciliation behavior, meaning a perpetrator approaching the family of someone that they killed, or the family of someone who was killed approaching a perpetrator. Actually, the people who did not listen in this particular case to the radio program were more likely to talk about reconciliation, but not participate in it. So, I did work in, I mean, it's too bad that I don't have time to talk about this. I want to talk about the police, and I'm not going to talk about this, but I did work in, when there was violence between Muslims and the Dutch in Amsterdam. And there, in that case, it was the city government. The mayor and the city government was the active bystander. They were the ones who invited me, and then they were the ones who implemented a variety of different programs based on a variety of principles that I described to them that were important for people to come together and overcome differences. I'm going to skip all that and talk for a bit about trainings in active bystandership. incident. How many people know what was the rioting incident? If so many hands had been raised when I asked you how many people know about Rwanda, I could have skipped that and just went on to other things. And anyway, so after the Rodney King incident, through a variety of events, I was asked by the agency responsible for all police training in California to develop a program for them to reduce that kind of behavior. Because what we saw there was perpetration by police and a lot of passive bystanders, police standing around and just watching. As I said, that encourages perpetrators. So I developed a program of training police to be active bystanders who take action to prevent unnecessarily harmful behavior by fellow officers. To prevent it, or if necessary, intervene to stop it. Now, I developed this program for a group appointed to propose what changes there should be in police training, and they suggested that this be included in all police training in California, but they decided to do this internally, and I had nothing more to do with it. But about 4 years ago, through a variety of events, the New Orleans police began to work on this training. And New Orleans had a very bad police department, a lot of violence against civilians, murders, cover-ups, all kinds of very bad things. One of the worst, if not the worst, police department in the country some time back. So they started to work on this program. I was involved, a few other consultants were involved, and there was a change in the police department. There was a new superintendent, and the whole spirit of the department has changed. And so we worked very hard to create this program, and every officer was trained in this. And there has been an incredible effect. The number of complaints went way down about police. Crime went down. Just a lot of positive change. And this program received quite a bit of attention in the New York Times, in other publications, in police publications. So a lot of police departments around the country became interested. And last year, we had a conference where approximately 100 police leaders from around the country, from different departments, who expressed interest in introducing this program, came to New Orleans, and we had this conference. And I gave the keynote address because, I initiated this program originally, but it really had a whole group of people who worked on this and created this. And this year we had another conference like this, but before this conference, we had a day of training of trainers to increase the number of people who are capable of doing training, because a whole bunch of departments are asking the New Orleans police to come and do a training for them in this. So we had a day where we were training 8 new trainers in this, 8 new police officers. And it's just amazing, some of the things that happen. Not only do police officers intervene mildly, because part of the training is skills. How do you do this? You don't go and try to punch your fellow officer to stop. We have incidents in which an officer is about to begin to do something, and another officer puts an arm around that officer's shoulder to calm that officer down. There were instances in which a woman police officer was arresting a woman, and that woman spit in her face, and she didn't retaliate. And she told afterwards to her supervisor, I epicked myself. EPIC is the name of the program. Ethical policing is courageous. EPIC. So people must say, I epicked myself. And there was a very interesting incident recently where, I don't have time to describe it. So what I want to do now is to stop and see if we can at least have a couple questions. I talked about 1/3 of what I wanted to talk about.